Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
Very glad you're with us for the Thursday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. And today we balance things out. Monday was all good. Tuesday and Wednesday, we couldn't find a good martini with both hands and a flashlight. And today we have all good martinis again. So the first one right in our own backyard here, Jim. For me, I live in Prince William County, Virginia. So it's very much in my backyard. I woke up to the good news today that the U.S. now has in custody one of the top leaders of the MS-13 gang. Fox News with the story, U.S. authorities have captured the MS-13 top leader for the U.S. East Coast. Officials captured the 24-year-old suspect in Woodbridge, Virginia, just south of Washington. Authorities have yet to release the suspect's name, but they say he's one of the top 3 leaders of the gang in the U.S. Well, apparently, he advanced pretty quickly, 24 years old. Attorney General Pam Bondi, FBI Director Kash Patel watching the arrest unfold from a nearby tactical operations center. Quote, says Pam Bondi, they executed a clean, safe operation and the bad guy is in custody. And thanks to the FBI, we got one of the worst of the MS-13 off the streets this morning. Virginia and the country are a lot safer today. Here is more on that from FBI Director Kash Patel.
This is what happens when you let good cops be cops. And we're going to continue to let good cops be cops across this country. President Trump gave us the executive decision to go after and safeguard our communities. General Bondi is our warrior of justice leading that charge. Governor Youngkin, it's an honor to be a partner in this operation with you and U.S. Attorney Siebert. This is the mandate we have. Right now we have an American dying every 7 minutes from a drug overdose. That is a national security crisis we have not seen ever before. We have a woman or child being raped every 6.5 minutes in this country. We have a homicide twice an hour. No part of that metric is a safe and secure America. But thanks to the brave leadership of this administration and the folks that you see here, we are returning our communities to safety. As you heard, we took down this morning a top leader of MS-13. That is not done easily. That is done with brilliant law enforcement.
So obviously great cooperation. Great that they got this guy. Makes me a little worried that if he's got a hub here, there's a lot more really bad people in this area. And of course, we know these gangs are not just involved in drugs, but also human trafficking and all sorts of other awful stuff. But I think it's also important what he said there, Jim. We obviously celebrated the fact that the numbers of people illegally crossing the border last month are microscopic compared to the Biden administration. Hopefully that continues. But we got a lot of bad people probably that got in these millions upon millions that came in over the last 4 years and even before that. And so the fight against them does not stop. Good to see they've got their eye on the ball.
I was going to say, Greg, when we turn this podcast into a full visual one, viewers will be able to see me grimacing every time in your introduction you already get to one of the jokes I had in mind before I can say it. Because my first thought was, Woodbridge, my God, this is Greg Columbus's backyard. So I'm glad that they were. So were they like a stone's throw from you? a few streets over, further over?
It was not even close to our neighborhood. Prince William County's got a lot of people, but close enough that you could drive there within 15, 20 minutes. Okay,
well, I point out that like for a long stretch, Fairfax County, where I live, had I think several hundred MS-13 members were believed to be residing in it. And it was very upsetting and troubling, but thankfully all of our local elected Democrats do have a plan. The plan is to price them out of this county through property taxes. And eventually even the MS-13 members won't be able to live here. That's the way they'll take care of that. I know it's going to shock you, but this guy they arrested today was in the country illegally. Go figure. You pointed out how you can raise quickly through the ranks of MS-13. By the way, so when I wrote a short corner item on this, and I referred to them as MS-16. Apparently, they kicked a field goal. But no, obviously it's fantastic this guy's off the streets, but you're almost impressed. At 24, I was just barely a pollywog writer. I was barely doing anything. This guy is one of the most dangerous people in the country. So that shows you don't underestimate, I was going to say America's young people, but he's not really one of America's young people now, is he? And finally, I would point out that MS-13, back in February, the Trump administration designated them, the Sinaloa cartel, and a whole bunch of these groups as foreign terrorist organizations, which opens up a whole bunch of different options for them. It went through just about everybody, including the Los Zetas, Tren de Aragua, the United Cartels, Northeast Cartel, and what they refer to as Cartel de Golfo, but I believe it is now the Cartel de Golfo de America.
Very well done. And yes, there's a couple of things that immediately pop into my mind. You may remember the 2017 governor's race here in Virginia between Ralph Northam and Ed Gillespie. Northam sadly won by 9 points. It was not a good year for Republicans here. But just before that election, it really tightened up because Ed Gillespie promised to crack down and get tough on MS-13. And what was the Democratic and media reaction? You xenophobic, hateful people. This is not a problem. And even then, this is long before the Biden floodgates opened. You were talking about how it was happening in Fairfax County. I think it was happening up in Montgomery County, Maryland. There were all sorts of gang killings, just grisly, dismembered people. I mean, and then the left knew it was a losing issue for them. So, of course, they had to pretend the issue A wasn't happening, or if it was so minimal that the GOP was blowing it out of proportion. So,
yeah, that was when they were running ads showing Ed Gillespie running down kids in a big black pickup truck. And I leave it at that point. Even then, most Northern Virginia Democrats believed that MS-13 was the name of one of the droids in Star Wars. So everybody's a little more up to speed now. I'm glad to see this guy off the streets.
Exactly. And the eyes on the ball. I'm sure the Biden administration Justice Department did some pre-dawn raids on legitimate targets, but the ones we kept hearing about were, Trump administration figures who weren't exactly going to come out with guns blazing, or, people who were pro-life demonstrators outside abortion clinics, because those are the real threats to American safety right now.
Greg, I take a backseat to very few people when it comes to criticism of, say, Roger Stone. But come on, look at the guy. He's not a threat to anybody. Not compared to this guy. You can wait till 9. I don't think he even gets up that early. You'll be fine. Pre-dawn raids. No one ever talks about after-dawn raids. But anyway, carry on.
That's not as dramatic, I guess, for some reason. But today's podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. Right now, therapy can feel like a big investment, but the state of your mind is just as important as your physical health. So don't neglect that. And with BetterHelp, you can search for the right therapist for you, and you can do so at a cheaper rate than you probably will with most other therapists. Usually it can run $100 to $250 per session, which obviously adds up fast. But with BetterHelp online therapy, you can save on average of up to 50% per session.
You're not going crazy. It's just the news cycle. With more than 30,000 therapists, BetterHelp is the world's largest online therapy platform, having served more than 5 million people globally. It's convenient, too. You can join a session with the click of a button, and it helps you fit therapy into your busy schedule. Plus, you can switch therapists at any time.
You probably have a pretty good idea if it's time for additional professional help. So if you are feeling that, give BetterHelp a try. Your well-being is worth it. Visit BetterHelp.com/3ML to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/3ML. All right, Jim. Kash Patel in that statement mentioned the cooperation of Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin. So let's talk about Glenn Youngkin a little bit more here in our second Good Martini. This is his last full year as governor. As we've mentioned many times, you can't run for re-election as governor in Virginia. You can come back 4 years later, but you can't have consecutive terms. The only state left in the country that has that policy. And so they just finished the legislative session. They passed a slew of bills. The Democrats narrowly controlled both the House of Delegates and the state Senate. And then they all get sent to Glenn Youngkin's desk. He signed 600 of them. He's allowed to amend some of them as governors, and so he did that to 160 different pieces of legislation, and he vetoed 159 bills, so much so that a Republican strategist told Fox News Digital, you could call him Veto Corleone. It's a little lame, but whatever. Virginia's General Assembly passed bills this session, still according to Fox, that would have prevented prayer in front of abortion clinics, required the Commonwealth to implement a comprehensive environmental justice strategy. Boy, does that sound expensive and waste of time. And adjusted criminal bond policies. And if the Democrats are in charge, they're not making bond higher. All of these bills were vetoed by Youngkin, and the legislature's Democratic majority is far from veto-proof, with 2-seat margins in each chamber. Other vetoed bills included 2 pertaining to gun control legislation, restricting the purchase or transfer of firearms, and the like. 10 of the bills were considered soft-on-crime legislation by critics, and about a dozen would have raised costs on Virginians. The governor also nixed a proposal to raise the state minimum wage to $13.50 per hour and later to $15 per hour. And of course, then the presumptive Democratic gubernatorial nominee Abigail Spanberger, former congresswoman in these parts, jumps on Twitter and says, Governor Youngkin just vetoed a bill that would have raised Virginia's minimum wage. At a time when so many Virginians are struggling to make ends meet, they deserve a governor who will help them get ahead and stay there. as your next governor, I'd sign this bill into law. So Democrats, congratulations on probably nominating yet another economically illiterate person to be the governor of this state. So, Jim, what do you make of Glenn Youngkin running out of ink and probably needing multiple pens to get all these vetoes done?
Well, first of all, yes, he probably needs a new pen, but he's not going to use the auto pen, like some presidents we know. You and I are pretty big fans of Youngkin. I think he's been a pretty darn good governor on a whole host of fronts for the state of Virginia, the Commonwealth of Virginia, for the three pedants out there in our audience. There are only two things. Like we had a real beef with the plan for the sports arena that thankfully that plan fell apart, and they're going to keep the Wizards and Capitals and Mystics in D.C. The second major mistake of his administration was that Veto Corleone nickname, because Glenn Youngkin is your good neighbor, maybe even a little bit of Ned Flanders to him, squeaky clean, bright, smart, cheerful, ready to go. He's not Veto Corleone. Come on. There's just nothing about, and maybe that's what makes the nickname funny, the same way Cocaine Mitch, like Mitch McConnell does not seem like a guy who's on cocaine. Quaaludes maybe, but not cocaine. And so this idea, but having said that, thank you for being there, Glenn Youngkin, and for vetoing all these ideas. And just kind of a heads up to Virginia voters. This November, I know it feels like a long ways away, but we elect a new governor, lieutenant governor, and state attorney general, and state house, right?
All of state house. State senate is not up. The house is.
Political landscape could look really different a year from now. And you could very easily see a Democratic governor signing all these things into law, depending on how things play out. And it's not where, I intend to be here for a while. So let's try to keep things on the way they're going. One of the odd things about Virginia having this off-year schedule is that, you leave in an off year. Sometimes there's a midterm year coming up and there's a Senate race open. I haven't seen Glenn Youngkin indicate that he has any interest in running for Senate. There was some, for 10 minutes, there was buzz about him running for president, but he just got elected into office. And last year was not really the right time for him. So I don't know when or what he does from here. This may be, I think he's trying to do as much as he can in one term. I think there are some people who are like, when you have a good governor like this, you're like, do we really need to have this 1 year term? This kind of does make you a lame duck, and you can't keep him around for more than 4 years. So we'll see how things shake out. But again, one last point, I was at the NRI National Review Ideas Summit last weekend, and we were talking about governors in blue states. And I was, look, if you can get a Larry Hogan in a Maryland, if you can get a Charlie Baker or a Mitt Romney in a Massachusetts, do so. Even if they're going to disappoint you, even if they're not what you like to see. Because at least, I describe this like a hockey goalie. They prevent bad things from happening. They're one more obstacle for the Democratic state legislatures, which are usually very heavily Democratic state legislatures, and usually pretty darn progressive in these deep blue states. So if you get a chance to put that, that Republican veto in place, do that. If nothing else, that you elect a Republican governor, you're going to put the brakes on a whole bunch of bad ideas. So, Virginia, let's choose carefully this November.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And hopefully Winsome Sears is able to win. As we've mentioned many times, if you win the White House the next year in Virginia, things usually don't go too well for that party. So it is an uphill climb, especially with the work of DOJ and a lot of federal jobs, many of which are in Northern Virginia, potentially, or already being on the chopping block. It's definitely going to be an uphill climb. But yeah, you talk about those blue states. They won't send Republicans to the Senate because they don't want to be complicit in their eyes of having a Republican majority in the Senate. But they also don't want their wallets completely emptied by Democrats in their own state. And so they will elect Republicans as governors. Winsome Sears, good luck. Abigail Spanberger, bad luck. And hopefully things turn out better than history might suggest in Virginia later this year. And obviously, Governor Youngkin, really good job. All right, Jim, on to our final good martini. And yesterday, there was some fun up on Capitol Hill. There was a hearing on the House side over whether we should keep funding things like NPR and PBS. And Katherine Maher, the CEO of NPR, was up on Capitol Hill yesterday. And if that name sounds familiar, we've had her on the Three Martini Lunch before, because I don't know if this was a TED Talk or what it was, but here was her conundrum about the truth when it came to the media.
Seeking the truth and seeking to convince others of the truth isn't necessarily the best place to start. In fact, I think our reverence for the truth might have become a bit of a distraction that is preventing us from finding consensus and getting important things done.
The look on Jim Garrity's face while that was playing.
I had a Tucker moment. I had the confused...
We have a consensus. We have a narrative we must advance. How dare you get in the way with the truth? But yesterday, she's up on the Hill. Jim Jordan of Ohio points out that a survey was done at NPR. 87 of the employees were registered Democrats that they were able to survey. 0 were Republicans, but still she insisted there was no political bias at NPR. Another member pointed out that the Hunter Biden laptop was deemed a waste of time to cover by NPR, and that flew under the radar as well. Brandon Gill, though, is a young congressman from Texas. He's only 31 years old, and he came with the receipts. So pay attention here. It's kind of a longer excerpt. Pay attention to not only how well prepared he is here, but how he unfolds this, because you got a lot of congressmen who love to grandstand, take up 4.5 of their 5 minutes by just speechifying. He does the perfect Tim Russert here. Pay attention.
Do you believe that America believes in black plunder and white democracy?
I don't believe that, sir.
You tweeted that in reference to a book you were reading at the time, apparently, The Case for Reparations.
I don't think I've ever read that book, sir.
You tweeted about it. You said you took a day off to fully read The Case for Reparations. You put that on Twitter in January of 2020.
Apologies, I don't recall that I did.
Okay.
I no doubt that your tweet there is correct, but I don't recall.
You think that white people should pay reparations?
I have never said that, sir.
Yes, you did. You said it in January of 2020. You tweeted, "Yes, the North. Yes, all of us. Yes, America. Yes, our original collective sin and unpaid debt. Yes, reparations. Yes, on this day."
I don't believe that was a reference to fiscal reparations, sir.
What kind of reparations was it a reference to?
I think it was just a reference to the idea that we all owe much to the people who came before us.
That's a bizarre way to frame what you tweeted. Do you believe that looting is morally wrong?
I believe that looting is illegal, and I refer to it as counterproductive. I think it should be prosecuted.
Do you believe it's morally wrong, though?
Of course.
Of course. Then why did you refer to it as counterproductive? It's a very different way to describe it.
It is both morally wrong and counterproductive, as well as being illegal.
You tweeted, "It's hard to be mad about protests," in reference to the BLM protests, not prioritizing the private property of a system of oppression. You didn't condemn the looting. You said that it was counterproductive. NPR also promoted a book called In Defense of Looting. Do you think that that's an appropriate use of taxpayer dollars?
I'm unfamiliar with that book, sir, and I don't believe that was at my time at NPR.
You tweeted that you read that book, but...
I don't believe that I did read that.
So, I mean, it's the perfect setup. Here's a seemingly straightforward question. She gives the answer that she thinks is going to be best for NPR, and he's got receipts as long as her arm to prove that she's blowing smoke at the committee. I guess the second lesson in here is be careful what you tweet. But, Jim, what do you make of that masterclass in interrogation?
Rapidly rocketing up my list of my favorite members of Congress. Because, unlike the Veto Corleone comparison to Glenn Youngkin, I'm going to make like 3 comparisons, and I got to figure out which one I like as the new nickname. It reminded me of Pierre Poilievre. Am I correcting that correctly? The Canadian, Poilievre, the Canadian conservative leader who's biting into the apple, and every time there's who says that? Who just completely skeptically rejecting the premise of every question. I got a real Norm Macdonald vibe from this questioning. Very much that's illegal, right? And, that's not what you said, just that. And then finally, there's Jeff. Am I alone in getting a Columbo vibe? But just one more question, sir. Just one more. God, you're right. What a masterclass. And look, I have always, in coverage of Congress and coverage of lawmakers, tried to appreciate the workhorses and not the show horses. I think we've all seen members of Congress go into histrionics and throw a fit, and then they play the video and they try to use it in fundraising. And it, maybe it gets them on the news, but it doesn't really edify. It's that old saying, it generates more heat than light, and all that stuff. This is what I wish every member of Congress could do. And there's nothing more powerful if you oppose somebody, if you disagree with somebody, than hanging them with their own words and putting them in a situation where, as the head of NPR, like, she just looks like a blithering idiot who has to say, well, everything I said then was in a very different political environment. So I no longer believe that anymore, sir. That's I believed it when that was good for me. And now that it's bad for me, I don't believe that anymore. Again, yeah, just a masterclass. And like, we have good martinis, but that was like a delightfully entertaining martini. And I'm just gonna listen to that when I'm going for walks and just yeah, really. No matter how bad a day you're having, you're not the head of NPR and questioning like that, where you're like, I never read that book. Oh, and when I said that I read it and loved it, I'm just blurbing it for a friend. I don't actually read books. I never learned how to read. That's going to be the next level of defense.
Yeah, that's one of those good martinis where you have an audible after you take that first sip. Hats off to Mary Catherine Ham for her tweet on this. It's basically what you just said, but catching a liberal white lady tweeting in 2020 that she took a day off to fully absorb a very important book about reparations and making her admit under oath that she probably didn't read it after all. It's an all-timer for liberal white lady moments. And then defensive looting as well. So she got a twofer there. Anyway, Jim, it's good to be back on the on having all these good martinis, and hopefully we got a lot more tomorrow. See you then.
Yeah. Well, everyone, thanks for listening, and stay tuned to the manic depressive 3 Martini Lunch.
It's all one or the other. Yep. Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks so much for being with us today. Please be sure to subscribe to the 3 Martini Lunch if you don't already. Tell your friends about us as well. Thanks also for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Follow us both on X. He's at Jim Garrity. I'm at Greg Corombos. Have a terrific Thursday. Join us again Friday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.